Hello everyone, welcome back to my latest video. It might be surprising that those of you watched my earlier videos would know that I primarily specialize in law. So it might be a surprise that I'm making a history video now. As it happens, along with being a lawyer, I'm also a history buff. I love reading history books. It's kind of my pastime. So I'm here to talk about a subject of which not much is known. So this is namely about Adolf Hitler and how he really views India. For all of us, we have primarily viewed Hitler until now as a friend to us, as someone who supported us in our movement for independence. But this could not be any farther from the truth. The truth being essentially what Hitler actually thought about us is expounded in his biography, The Mein Kampf, in a few paragraphs, which Indians all across the country buy in from the streets and from bookstores, but usually don't bother to read because of the heavy language and the way the book is made, the book is written, so to say. So nobody really bothers. As it happens, though, Adolf Hit, as it happens in that book itself, Adolf Hitler made his views clear. But just to be sure, even if it weren't clear, but just to be sure, let us move ahead in this video and find out what exactly he thought of us as a people. So number one is it must be known that it must be known that as a um, how to put this, as Hitler and the British, their relation, despite the fact that they fought in World War II, it might be surprising to know that he originally admired the British Raj, that he Hitler was actually a very strong proponent of white supremacy. We all know of his discrimination against Jews, against other inferior races. We all know about the Jewish Holocaust, that where he built up concentration camps and gas chambers, specially for killing scores of Jews and other inferior racial groups. But very few know that he thought the same of us Indians. In fact, in his speeches that he made as a political agitator prior to his coming to power, when Hitler, he had back then the Nazi party used to be known as the German Workers' Party. He used to be a political agitator. He gave speeches where he made it very clear he actually admired the fact that a handful of Englishmen could control crores of Indians and such a vast land as India, and essentially run the whole thing as an extraction operation, because that's what the British Raj was. In the Victorian age, they used to be all about enlightening us, about essentially the British, they ran the British Raj as a project for extracting all of India's resources for their own benefit, but they used to hide it under various guises. The British had this concept, especially in the Victorian age, as the white man's burden. This being that the British believed it to be as that they were on a civilizing mission, that it was their divine right to rule over so-called inferior races such as us, black and brown races such as us Indians, and to bring the enlightenment of the British or European way of thinking to us. Essentially, all of this is nonsense as is established now, but that's how it used to be back then. So the thing is, Adolf Hitler was one of the proponents of this, and he admired this fact that so many Britons could use that sort of delusion to control us, and he was a proponent of this. And in speeches, he made it very clear that he wanted an alliance with the British, and that he wanted the British Empire to continue forever and more, for as long as it could. That he believed that India was incapable of independence in any measure. That in the interests of the world order, it was best for white supremacy to continue in the world. Hitler was a big proponent of that. In fact, it went so far that in 37 he literally when the Viscount Halifax, the ambassador from Britain to Germany, he used to be a viceroy known as Lord Irwin, who had who used to be viceroy of India during the British era in the early 30s. So in 1937, when he had come back to Britain and had been sent as an ambassador to Nazi Germany, he and Hitler had talked about what to do, as in the Indian agitations, the freedom agitations were growing stronger and stronger, and prominent among them being our own Mahatma Gandhi. So Halifax and Hitler discussed what could be done about Gandhi or the other freedom agitators. So Hitler replied very simply, shoot Gandhi. And if not just Gandhi, if Gandhi doesn't suffice, shoot everybody else involved with him. So yeah, anybody who says thinks Hitler is still a friend of India should really see into this, and uh, they should think twice about what they believe, because a friend of India would definitely not have said something like this. The fact that he could so dismissively said this is a proof of his contempt towards us as a people and nation, and more importantly, for what he felt towards it, and more importantly of his views. Hitler was after all a man of violence, keen to get a war started to bring Germany back to its glory. So yes, so but for him and his fellow extremists, this was all they could think of. But just to put it up, this was what he thought of us as a people. Then, like I said earlier, in Mein Kampf, people they buy the book. Even in India, they usually buy the book, but they don't bother reading what's inside the book. See, the book is very heavy. They usually buy it for show, just as a showpiece. The book is written in a very heavy language. Paragraphs are condensed together. Language is complicated, so reading it is quite a task. So most don't bother. As it is, I have no doubt, even in Nazi Germany, just to please the Führer, his fellow Nazis would buy the book and keep it, but not read it. But that said, those of you not read it, that there are paragraphs here which explicitly state that he believed that the Indian independence movement was nothing more than a farce in the face of the natural order of white supremacy, the white man's burden, as I stated earlier, and that the British should do whatever they can to destroy the independence movement and put the rights to the world again, as in resume their place as the natural leaders of India and of their colonies. In fact, in his book, he literally referred to our freedom fighters as charlatans, pompous Orientals, and Asiatic mountebanks. A lot of these terms, mind you, were used even by the British colonialists. Many the more extreme ones like Winston Churchill and Reginald Dyer, the Winston Churchill, and many of the other British people roving over us. You could say the conservatives. They thought of us Indians like that. So yeah, so Hitler had the same views. Then he believed that we were an inferior race, that we were not capable at all of ruling ourselves, forgetting the fact that we had done so well for thousands of years before a bunch of foreigners conquered us and decided that they had the right to rule over us just on the basis of force of arms. This is all nonsense, but that's how it was. Then in then in 1936 he made a very particular statement, which I will state in a further slide. Then swastika versus Hakenkreuz. Now, while Hitler thought of us Indians as inferior, the basis of his Nazi ideology was a rather delusional belief in the superiority of the so-called Aryan race. He believed that Aryans as a race, they came from India, and the German Teutonic race, which he believed they were, and the British race, they were all of the same descent, which means that not only that Germans were inherently superior to all the other races. He thought of the British as the same way, which is why he was so friendly with Britain at the start, and why he sought an alliance, and why he believed the British Empire was the best thing to happen to the world, to India. And in that way, he also believed that certain aspects of ancient Indian culture, despite him holding Indians in contempt, this Indian culture, certain aspects could be useful. The swastika, our swastika, which is a holy symbol, which is a symbol of God himself, and which for 5,000 years of our history, and even more to say, it has symbolized prosperity, it has symbolized harmony in the universe, and our spiritual well-being. All of this is symbolized. So that's the thing. Our swastika was such a holy symbol, but this fellow, this monster, he deigned to somehow think that he and his Germans were also of the same stock as an Indians. I'm not saying they were, and they could have been, but he believed that the swastika was his to use as he saw fit, and which he did. He and his Nazis would use the swastika, they would tilt it, and they would use it as the emblem of the Third Reich, of Nazi Germany. Which is why when we see photos of Nazi flag on the internet, it's usually seen at the red background and with a tilted swastika, which they call a Hakenkreuz. And this was used by them to symbolize the purity of the Aryans, the racial purity. The Nazis, this way, they hope to use this to symbolize a sort of connection with the ancient Indians. In particular, the head of one of the Nazi leaders, a man named Heinrich Himmler, he was very interested in this sort of connection. But of course, this was all delusional on their part. There were a lot of differences between Indians and the Nazis. The Nazis themselves made sure to propound such differences. But whatever connection they believed there was, it simply wasn't. They were just deluding themselves. Then that said, even with all the Nazi racism towards us, against us, I would say, all the views that Hitler and the Nazis propounded, and mind you, uh, there was persecution of Indians as well, which I will go into further later. That said, when it came to politics, especially when World War II arrived, Subhash Chandra, the Nazis believed that Indian support would help to win against Britain, whom they were in conflict with at that time. So Subhash Chandra Bose, who had a prominent leader of ours, who had been in house arrest in Calcutta at the time, he in 1941, in a daring escape with assistance from members of his family and associates, he escaped from Calcutta, evading the British authorities, and first made his way to Kabul in Afghanistan. And from there, an associate of his secured a passage to Berlin via aircraft, I believe. Then he reached there in 41 when the war was going on, and he sought German support, Nazi support for Indian independence. The Nazis, they sort of they helped him set up a radio station called Azad Hind Radio or Free India Radio, where he would broadcast Nazi victories and British defeats to boost the Indians' morale and give them hope of independence. Of course, the Nazis were never really sincere about Indian independence. They just wanted to they just wanted to use Bose and his radio station or whatever he did as a tool in their war against Britain. Their racist views against Indians never changed. Not even at the very end of not very at the end of the war, when their regime was close to complete destruction, also their views didn't change one bit. Now, what happened? Let's explore further. In 42, when Bose was landed in 41, he met with several Nazi leaders. He met with the foreign minister, a man called Joachim von Ribbentrop. Then he met with other Nazi leaders. He wanted to meet with Hitler himself, but he was made to unnecessarily wait for, I believe, at least 13 months. Finally, he secured a meeting with Hitler in the Reich Chancellery, Hitler's main base of operations in Berlin. But the meeting didn't go so well. To put it this way, Hitler, he had a habit of monologuing. Even at his summer vacation home in Berchtesgaden, it was a place in southern Germany where he had his summer palace. He would host guests, and there he would indulge in solo speeches which went on for hours. Like he would talk on various topics, and he would make it out that he was a sole expert on everything, and he would keep on talking without allowing anyone else to interrupt. So that's how it was. He was famous for monologuing. Hitler had a thing for monologues. This is historically well documented. If you go to the internet and read about him, you'll find this out. So this meeting with Bose was the same. It was a monologue of sorts. But even as this monologue went on, Subhash Chandra Bose tried to interfere. He wanted Hitler, for instance, to uh, delete anti-Indian passages in the Mein Kampf, but Hitler made all sorts of lame excuses, saying he couldn't do that, or that the book was already in circulation for a long time, so deleting those passages would take too long or something, even though it was really his own book. Of course, he should have been able to do it in his own book, but he just didn't want to. It's that simple. Then expediency of the war, and that he did not have time for sovereignty and all of it just lame excuses. The core of the issue was Hitler did not deviate from his views against Indians at any point in time, and even at this point, and even when Indian support would have helped him in the war, he didn't do so. Now, what became of this meeting later, that I'll explain further. Now, before I go ahead, I want to state further that in an earlier slide, what he had explicitly stated in 1936 against Indians. He made this very degrading statement, namely that Indians could not even walk, and it was the British who taught them how to walk. Such a nonsensical statement one couldn't have made. A very racist statement. Frankly, I wouldn't even arch racists like Winston Churchill would not have made this sort of statement. But Adolf Hitler, in his absorbed in the absolute ridiculousness of his ideology and racism, somehow made this. It was also, of course, yeah, this sort of racism was prevalent at the time, where it was believed that inferior races, brown and black skinned people, they required white people's assistance to function, and also so Hitler's statement was kind of on par with the times, even if it was absolutely degrading and horrifying. Anyway, so that said, Hitler did not hesitate to use us Indians as and when he saw fit. So, along with allowing Bose to establish the Azad Hind Radio, he also allowed Bose to establish the Free India Legion, the Indische Legion as the Germans called it. This used to be a part of the German Wehrmacht. Now, what was the Wehrmacht? This was what the Nazi army was called in World War II, the German army, the one that Hitler used in his various conquests. There were two branches of this, of course. One was the Wehrmacht, and the other one, I'll talk about the other one later. But within the Wehrmacht, late in the war, he allowed Bose to establish the Free India Legion. Now, this was composed of Indian prisoners of war. Now, who are these Indian? Now, the thing about, again, this is not a very well-known fact, but the fact is that when during World War II, many Indians from India volunteered to join the British Indian Army in both the European and Asian theaters of war. In fact, nobody knows, very few know this, but at Dunkirk, after the German conquest of France, when there weren't just the British and French soldiers, there were Indian soldiers as well in France at the time. So when the British retreated from Dunkirk, they pretty much left the Indian soldiers to their own fate. This basically, even in the time of defeat, when soldiers are supposed to stick together, racism still was still prevalent here, and the white soldiers, they chose to leave the brown skinned Indian soldiers to rot in the hands of the enemy. And many of these Indian soldiers ended up in German POW camps, prisoner of war camps. So Subhash Chandra Bose saw this as an opportunity, since this Indian POWs would have had little loyalty, if any, towards Britain. So he chose to recruit them into this Free India Legion. The some about at its height, it was about 4,500 of these Indian POWs. Then there were expatriates also, people who had emigrated from India and were staying in Europe at the time, who had fallen into the clutches of the Germans. So they were also recruited. Then Subhash Chandra Bose used the Indian tiger, a leaping tiger, as the insignia, the emblem of this unit. Then in there, then there were cultural. Then what about cultural adaptations? As it is, after the India, after the first Indian War of Independence in 1857, the British, of fearful, that they were very apprehensive of recruiting Hindu soldiers or into the army again, since these Hindu soldiers, particularly those from Bengal and Uttar Pradesh, they are the ones who had incited the Indian revolt. So they had made a habit of recruiting only from those who had been loyal to them at the time of that revolt, namely the Sikhs, the Gurkhas and all, particularly Sikhs. So, so this Sikh members served in the British Indian Army a lot. Even today in the Indian Army, the vast majority of our Indian soldiers usually come from Sikhs, Rajputs, and there is a Gurkha unit also. It is from Nepal, but after independence, a portion of that Gurkha unit was retained by India, and a portion was taken away by Britain. So we still have the Gurkhas. So Sikhs, Sikhs, they have a tradition of martial valor. They have a tradition of serving in the military. So basically, even in today in the Indian Army, they are usually permitted to wear turbans in accordance with the custom of their religion, where they usually wear turbans, the male ones. So even here in the Free India Legion, they were permitted to wear turbans with inscribed Freie Indian, Free India. And obviously the Nazis used this Free India Legion for their own purposes. They were deployed to Italy when the Allies invaded Italy in 43 to open up a front against Hitler, namely to topple Mussolini and rob Germany of a valuable ally. Okay, Italy was not that valuable, but still, it would be a pain in the arse for Hitler. So then they were also deployed to France, particularly in 44 during the so-called D-Day invasion, when the Allies invaded the beaches of Normandy in France, which would open up the Western Front against Germany. The 1944 is commonly believed to be when Germany was on a one-track course towards defeat with no way back. So the Nazis definitely used Indians for their own purposes, even if they viewed them as inferior animals. So just the way the British really used us Indians in their own wars at the time. So then, however, again, Hitler, however, true to character, did not make very good use of this. Where he and even in 45, even when the war was irretrievably turned against Germany, even as late as 45, when Nazi Germany was pretty much occupied by allied powers on all sides, when the Russian army was literally at the doorstep of the Reich Chancellery, his office, when Hitler was on the verge of being captured and was about to commit suicide, even then he literally refused to deploy the Free Indian Legion in this very desperate phase. He again made a very derogatory statement stating that the Indian legion's a joke, that there are Indians who can't kill a louse, some sort of small animal or something. They won't kill an Englishman either. This was made all the way back in March 45, just before, I would say, the final assault on Berlin. The basic, no, as in the Russian army was closing in on Germany, the allies all from the west, the western allies from the west. Germany was on the verge of defeat, and he still had the nerve to say this, had the nerve to not want to use them in any way, not want to recognize them as equal to Germans. The man remained stuck in his ideology to the bitter end. That much we could give him. Then he dissolved the Free India Legion and transferred the members to the Waffen SS. Now, now just to say this, I talked earlier about the Wehrmacht, which was like the professional German army of World War II. The soldiers of this army were not affiliated to the Nazi party in any way. They were free of politics. That changed after 44, particularly after the July 1944 attempt by Klaus von Stauffenberg on Hitler's life, where as a part of radicalization, even the Wehrmacht was politicized, and where they would have the military salute, they were instead uh, they were instead for made to use the Hitler salute in greeting. But until then they were strictly professional, apolitical. But the Nazi party had its own military unit, and this was known as the Waffen SS. This Waffen SS was deployed all over the this Waffen SS was used by the Nazi party as its own military force prior to coming to power, and even after coming to power they would use it as a as a police force of sorts, and as a military force as well. In World War II, the Waffen SS would often follow behind the Wehrmacht, and they would torch enemy villages, they would massacre Jews, they were in charge of the major concentration camps and the gas chambers where Jews and other peoples would be exterminated and so on. So yes, that's how it was. So yeah, so the Waffen SS was pretty bad. Not to mention, after, in fact, so bad the Waffen SS was that after World War II, they the allies, they would look out for anyone with a double lightning bolt inscribed on their bodies, or having a insignia, because the double lightning bolt was the insignia of the Waffen SS. It had become very infamous. So they would hunt down, so anybody who was, so they would first of all examine any German POWs to see if any of them had the double lightning tattoo. If they did, then they would either be shot on sight, or they would be given much harsher punishments at the trials they held after the war. So yes, so the Waffen SS was pretty bad, and yeah, that's what Hitler thought of the Indian Legion. Now we have talked about how we thought of Indians. That said, there were Indians who lived even in the Third Reich, even in Germany at that time, just as there are who do now. Now they live for education, because education is almost free there. For social security, they can get a good foreign education, a prestigious one at a low cost or no cost, and they also have access to good social security and all. And just as Indians are everywhere over the world now, so they used to be so back then as well. Even before the rise of Hitler, they used to stay there, and after the rise of Hitler also they stayed. Now, that said, the Nazis, keeping in line with their views, they persecuted Indians very badly, like really, really badly. Now, how badly? Let's talk about this. One was there was this journalist called A.C.N. Nambiar. He was a left-leaning communist, not particularly communist, but he did sympathize with communist ideals. The communist movement in India was one of the most pivotal movements in our independence. Even the Soviet Union used to apparently back the communists in India at the time of the British Raj. which is why even the British were suspicious of communists in India. And the whole basis of Nazi ideology was anti-communism. In fact, one of the primary reasons why they used to persecute Jews was that they believed that Jews were by and large communists. They in fact believed that that Jews and communism, they were one and the same. In fact, during the initial years of their reign, when they first built their concentration camps, it was not ordinary Jews who were first incarcerated. The incarceration began slowly. First, they were deprived of their legal rights, restrictions imposed on them. Then they were made to wear the yellow star, and then they were put in camps. The ones they put in camps were first their political enemies, which were the communists, social democrats, and so on, and also those they deemed fit ill for society, namely the people in mental asylums and all. But just to but I'm digressing. Just to come back to the main point, this ACN Nambiar fellow was a communist sympathizer of sorts, and he used to publish articles favoring the communist movement in India. So the Nazis were suspicious of this. So they had him arrested right after they came to power, like way back in February 33, just after Hitler had become chancellor. So the Nazis did start to act on their views almost immediately after they came to power. So who arrested him? Now I have talked about the Waffen SS, but there used to be another branch of the Nazi military, the wing called the SA. The SA used to it used the SA and the SS were kind of like rivals in the in the military branch of the Nazi party. They used to commit all sorts of atrocities to outdo each other. But the SA was disbanded in 34 in the night of the Long Knives event, where uh, you could say the Nazis kind of cleansed this unit apart. Hitler had this fellow called Ernst Röhm killed because he was suspected of being a contender for against Hitler. So Hitler had him eliminated, and the SA was disbanded. And those who survived the light of the Long Knives, they were all integrated into the SS. So this SA arrested ACN Nambiar. He was thrown into Nazi jail. He was beaten. He was brutalized heavily, and afterwards he was thrown out of the country. He was deported back to India. And even the British authorities of the time, despite them being in charge of Indians as their subjects, were not so sympathetic. They rarely bothered about Indians imprisoned in Nazi jails, just as they rarely bothered about Indians living in their own India. So that's how it was. So yes, so this ACN Nambiar is the more prominent example. There were other examples also. Then in fact, in 35, the Nuremberg laws were passed. There is this city called Nuremberg in southern Germany. It was an iconic city for the Nazis, where they used to hold their rallies. Those of you seen pictures on the internet about Hitler and his so-called rallies, you will find that they use those rallies were held in Nuremberg. Those awesome looking rallies where soldiers would march past, where Hitler would look like some big emperor who was going to rule over the world and all. That's where in 35 they first passed the Nuremberg laws in 1935. Then those Nuremberg laws, they prohibited interracial marriages between Aryans and non-Aryans, and we Indians happen to be included in the non-Aryan category, which means that even though Hitler believed that Indians were supposedly Aryans, or at least they were Aryans before, the present Indians were not worthy of being Aryan. So during this period, several marriages between Germans and Indians were forcibly dissolved and the Indians deported from Germany. So this used to happen. Then when it comes to students staying in Germany during those times, the Gestapo, the secret German, the secret German police that the Nazis established after they came to power, they would shadow these Indian students, because these Indian students were widely held guilty of having sympathies for communism. these Indian students, many of them were politically motivated and were highly inclined to free India by any means necessary. So they turned to communism as a means. So Nazis were suspicious of these Indian students. Even if some of those Indian students were not communists, if they are just neutral, even then the Nazis would suspect them. A dictatorship like Nazi Germany, there was no due process, there was no trial, no hearing, nothing. If they suspected you of anything, they could do anything against you. That's how dictatorships were like this work. So that said, there were some Indians who did support the Nazi regime despite all this. There used to be this fellow called P.C. Biswas who used to study at the KWI, the Kaiser Wilhelm Institute. There's this institute. We'll talk about this institute in another in the next slide. But just to put it simply, this the system. The purpose of this Nazi institute was to study and and ensure the racial purity of the German race. That was what the Nazis aimed to do with this. This was the most prominent institute they had. So, moving further, in this institute, as like I said earlier, the Nazis, they would measure the racial purity of all the individuals who were living in Nazi Germany at the time, particularly the Indians. They would measure, they would use scientific instruments to do absurd things like define the height of individuals who were deemed fit or unfit to be belong to the Aryan race, or their features and all. The thing is, when it comes to the Nazi, basically the Nazis, they they were very much into this eugenics thing. Now, of course, eugenics, this whole racial science thing is highly discredited because of the research into genetics and all, which have proved that all humans are biologically the same. There is no real difference between any of us. So the whole racial science is pure nonsense that was cooked up by white people in those days to justify their supremacy over the rest of us. And the Nazis took it to even absurd lengths, even when it came, for instance, the way they persecuted Jews. It was the thing is religion. There is a thing called freedom of religion. That is Judaism. Everybody is free to follow his or her own religion. Judaism is, after all, but a religion. Anybody who follows the Judaism religion is a Jew. He does, but the Nazis, they took it to such absurd lengths that anybody who was a Jew, it didn't matter if he was Jewish by religion or not. Even a Christian could be called a Jew. If, for instance, he had Christian, Jewish parents or Jewish grandparents or great grandparents, or sometimes even further. So they would measure your Jewishness or whatever by your ancestry, not by what religion you followed. Now this is absurd, of course, but that's what the Nazis did, which is why even Christians often would end up in concentration camps if they were designated as Jewish by the Nazis. And same with Indians. They already defined Indians as unworthy of being Aryan. So that said, that they would classify certain Indians as racially pure, racially fit to be Germans. So they use this institute for that purposes. Absurd, but yes. Now, despite what Hitler had talked about us, what he believed about, the views he held of us, Indians still continue to idolize him long after long after the war was over, long after we all won our independence. In particular, there was this weird lady called Savitri Devi. In Europe, she was known as Maximiani Portus. She promoted Hitler as some sort of divine avatar in a book she wrote in 1958. So in 1958, so essentially this Savitri Devi, this ship essentially, just before I talk about Savitri Devi, I want to expound a bit about Hindu culture. In our Hinduism, in our Hindu mythology, there is a Kali, there is a circle, we believe in a cycle of time, the four yugas to be precise. One is Krita Satya Yuga, the age of virtue and justice. Then there is the Krita Yuga, the age in which the Ramayana happened. The Dwapar Yuga, the age when the Mahabharata happened. Then the Kali Yuga, which is believed to be the present age, the age of the so-called age of corruption and injustice. So it is believed in Hindu mythology that at the end of each of these yugas, an avatar of Lord Vishnu would appear to set things right for humanity, to cleanse the human race of its impurities and sins, and to bring humanity back to the path of virtue. Now, for some reason, this Savitri Devi actually believed that Hitler was one such avatar of Vishnu, that he was secretly worshipped as a god in homes in Kolkata during World War II. I'm not sure about this worship thingy, but it is known that during World War II, many Indians were Hitler supporters because they believed that Hitler's victory would mean India's independence. But that's a delusional belief. Hitler admired the British Empire a lot and would never have wanted it dissolved. It is more likely that had he defeated Britain and occupied the country, he would have just taken the British Empire and turned it into his own. Which means instead of us being independent, we would have transitioned from from British subjects to Nazi subjects, which would have actually been even worse, because the British Raj, for all its horrors, when it came to the way they treated us, the famines they caused, the resource extraction they did, the Nazis would have amped that up to 10 and more. So again, this was the Hitler could not have been worshipped as a god, but that's what she said. Then her work made it clear that she believed that Nazism, or National Socialism to say its full form, it was kind of like a stage in the Kali Yuga where Hitler was was a liberator of humanity, was someone who had come to set humanity right. Well, I'm not sure, but if you can call, but I'm pretty sure you are crazy if you could call a man who murdered millions of innocent people on an absurd ideology of race uh, a savior of humanity. Of course, Hitler believed that himself, but belief is not important. That your actions are, and your actions are those of murdering innocents, that makes you a monster, not a savior. So this Savitri Devi, I don't know why she thought this way. Maybe she was a bit insane, or maybe she was a Hitler believer. Sometimes there are people who hold all sorts of insane beliefs and they never let go of them despite all the evidence to the contrary. That said, there were plenty of Indians also who believed it, and it is possible Hitler's views on India were not very well known back then. They were not very well known back then, since the media at the time, namely the newspapers, radio, and television, black and white TV at the time, they were all highly controlled. They could be controlled to determine what sort of information should be provided to the public. So Hitler's views about India would not have been particularly well known. It's only now that it's being well known. That said, the World War II was fought by many means. One obvious means was to planes, bombs, guns, tanks, and so on, through strategies on for battlefields and all. There were other strategies also. One such strategy was through the media. They would publish newspapers where they would print defeats of one of the enemy party and their own victories to bolster the morale of the soldiers and the civilian population. And the other was through radio waves. Basically, they would also use broadcasts to. I'll talk further about this broadcast. In 1939, when the war clouds began gathering on the European horizon, when it looked like Britain and Germany were headed at war with each other, the Germans started broadcasting anti-colonial messages to Indians using that they would do this using Hindi, or Hindustani as it was known then, and other Indian languages. Then in 1941, as I said earlier, Subhash Chandra Bose escaped and arrived at Berlin. where he wanted to amp up the anti-British propaganda to ensure his country's freedom. To do that, in 42 established the Azad Hind Radio, where he broadcasted Nazi victories and British defeats to entice Indians to rebel against the British masters and win their freedom. Then it peaked early on. Basically one of the other broadcasts was focusing on British internal problems to put a picture of British colonial inefficiency and to entice Indians to rebel against what they pursued as inefficient and maladministrating British governors and all. Now, there is one book that I had researched for this video, and I'm going to talk about this book here. Vaibhav, this book was written by a well-known fellow named Vaibhav Purandare in 2021. It's called Hitler and India. Everything that I have stated here in this video, it is all stated in this book. This is a very remarkable book, very small one, written very simply in a modern English language, written in the most simple language there is, and it's very readable. You could read it at leisure anytime you wanted. So those of you who want to research more on Hitler versus India thingy that I just said in this video, you can refer to this book. This book will explain to you all that I have told you in far more detail. So yes, so that's so yes, so those of you want to do more research, please be free welcome to try this book. This book is available at a price of 400 to 600 rupees. You could buy it online if you want. So moving ahead, and for after so what happened? So we're talking about that meeting that Subhash Chandra Bose had with with Hitler, right? So what became of that meeting? Subhash Chandra Bose, when he realized that Hitler was absolutely not going to do anything for Indian independence, he decided that he had to seek the help of another anti-British power. That was Japan. The main anti-British power in Europe was Germany, and in Asia it was Japan. And Japan was making tremendous progress, conquering each and every one of the European colonies and essentially dealing the European powers, particularly Britain, a heavy hand. So Subhash Chandra Bose realized that once he realized that Hitler would never do anything for India, he decided to switch attention to Japan. And when he told this of Hitler, Hitler agreed and decided to help him by providing him a submarine ride to Madagascar on a German submarine, where he would switch to a Japanese submarine and traveled secretly to Japan, which he did. So yes, so a meeting which Subhash Chandra Bose waited for 13 months, and which meeting was really Hitler's monologue. It ended with nothing more than a submarine ride to Japan. No offer of Indian independence, no concrete offers, nothing. So yes, so that was what it was. Then when Subhash Chandra Bose arrived in Japan, the Japanese took far more interest in Indian independence. There, you could say their shtick was independence of the Europe's Asian colonies. That was kind of a propaganda they used to entice other Asians to the Japanese cause. So here also they took up Bose's cause of Indian independence, and they helped him establish what is now known as the Indian National Army, the INA, which again, like the Free Indian Legion, was comprised of Indian POWs taken prisoner after Japan conquered the British colonies in Asia. Again, like in Europe, the British soldiers, when they retreated from defeats, they would often leave these Indian soldiers to their fate, racism and all that. Even in defeat, racism was still hugely prevalent. So they would leave these Indians to rot in the hands of the enemy, just like in Europe. So Subhash Chandra Bose and the Japanese recruited these people into the Indian National Army, and yes, And the Indian National Army did attempt to free India. They first attempted an invasion of the northeastern parts of India, the famous battles at Imphal and Kohima in Assam. But they failed, and the British retook control of those territories. And after World War II, with both Japan, Germany and Japan completely defeated and in ruins, the the Indian independence felt like a failure until the 1946 Indian naval mutiny, along with the mutinies in the army, air force, and all. Indian mutiny, I should say 1946 Royal Indian Navy mutiny. That was what it was known as at the time. And subsequent mutinies in the army and air force also happened in 46, because of which Britain finally was forced to leave India. After all, Dr. Babasaheb Ambedkar and many other people themselves said that the British had sustained the rule in India on the backbone of the Indian soldiers' loyalty to the crown. And once that loyalty was broken with the 46 rebellion, the British realized that they could no longer stay in India, so they fled immediately. While leaving, so they fled immediately, leaving India as an impoverished third world country. So to conclude this video, the whole thing was, how to put this, it was sad, to put it mildly. There we have, if the Nazis had taken our help, if the Nazis had been more eager to seek Indian help, and if they had renounced their anti-Indian views, which I stated earlier in this video, then so much could have happened. Maybe the Nazis, God help us, could have actually won the World War II. They made the same mistake throughout the war. For their race, they were very fanatically committed to their ideology, even at the cost of sensible politics. For instance, many of the Jews they expelled from Germany were scientists and all. Albert Einstein in particular was a Jew, and he was, how to put it, he was a genius. Now, and he along with other Jewish scientists expelled from Germany were the ones that would help the United States develop the atomic bombs dropped on Japan to end World War II, making America the first nuclear power in the modern age. Now imagine if the scientists had been allowed to stay in Germany and had been allowed free reign to work as they will. The Nazis could have just put aside their prejudices for temporarily and put the scientists as an exception. Then they would have been the nuclear power. Then history would have changed. And a world where Nazi Germany was the first country to split the atom would have been a very different world. Thankfully, that never happened. And even in 41, when the Germans invaded Russia and the Soviet Union, to be more precise, they actually encountered support from these peoples. These peoples had suffered a lot under Stalin, who was as much of a brutal dictator as Hitler. So they believed that the Germans were liberation personified, that they were the liberating party. Now, if the Germans had set aside their prejudices, the Nazis, to be more precise, had set aside their prejudices and had worked with these peoples, then they could have actually won the war in the East. But but instead they stuck to their Nazism. They burned down enemy villages. They unnecessarily made enemies of people who could have been their friends, or at least temporarily politically situational friends, if nothing else. That is sensible politics to win victory. But the Nazis, they valued their ideology more than their victory. So again, what happened was these peoples, they chose to back Stalin despite what they had endured under him earlier, and years later, and at the end, Germany lay in ruins, the Nazi ideology discredited and all. So just to put it simply, there wasn't much that could have stopped Germany's defeat. Nazi Germany was an inherently self-destructive state when you really look at it. There is literature which proves that the way the German economy ran during those times and the way the Nazis incessantly waged wars, these wars were waged mostly because their economy was bankrupt, even though they showed a rosy picture, and they needed the loot from these other countries to back it up. So either way, Nazi Germany was never going to last, but they could have lasted. But with the views that they held, it was never going to happen. And we Indians, well, the sad thing is we still think of Hitler as a friend all this time. It is time we consider all this new evidence. Those of you watch this video, I hope you will think twice before buying that Mein Kampf from the bookstore, or if not, you'll just read it in the library, find out the anti-Indian passages, and make up your mind about what Hitler really was for us and whether he was our friend. Ultimately, this video proves that the saying that an enemy of my enemy is my friend, where it is a common political saying where it is believed that if your enemy has an enemy, you can ally with said enemy to win ground against your enemy. But that doesn't happen. Sometimes the enemy of your enemy is your enemy as well. That's a sticky spot, but yes, it can't really be helped. Politics is a sticky field, and the enemy of my enemy is my friend usually works, but sometimes in instances like this it doesn't. So again, this whole thing was never really going to happen. The Nazis would never ally with Indians as equals, since they viewed them as inferior dogs, and we Indians couldn't ally with Nazis for the same reason, I mean for the opposite reason. Then again, this is kind of a lost opportunity, but again maybe not so much of a lost opportunity, so it doesn't matter. Then those of you who are very keen on researching Nazism and how Nazism related to India, particularly what Hitler and the Nazis thought of India and Indians, I would recommend certain sources. Recommendation number one would be, I would recommend this book, the book I talked about earlier, Hitler and India. Vaibhav Purandare is an excellent writer who has written many other books, other prominent book being a book on Chhatrapati Shivaji Maharaj, which I have also read and which I find particularly enlightening. To inform you all, this book actually forms the basis of this video that I have made just now. So I would also recommend this book to you all. It's available very cheaply, like 400 to 600 rupees you pay online and you get this book. It is written very simply, in simple English, and if you can read it at leisure, it's very entertaining, very instructive, very enlightening. So go for this book if you ever have the time and you want to. Then another book, another source of information regarding this is some foreigner called Milan Hauner wrote this. It's a military history. It relates to the Free India Legion in Germany that Subhash Chandra was established during his stay there in 41-42. I'm not sure how this is reliable, since I would say a book written by an Indian regarding this subject is much better than foreign books. But if you want to research more into this book, the research more on this subject, and you want foreign sources as well, then you can go ahead for this. Then the last source I would recommend, which I have not known, but this is sources called the Azad Hind Radio Archives. Now obviously the radio broadcast made via this channel, this Azad Hind radio channel, there are records of this thing, but this is very difficult to obtain. I suppose you would need to go to museums or expend a lot of money trying to get access to this sort of thing. Basically, when it comes to this foreign book I talked about, the Indian Legion in Germany and Azad Hind Radio Archives, you'd have to be a history buff or a professional historian who is very seriously into this sort of subject to want to research all this. So for those of you who want to know more about this but aren't very keen on deep research or just want to have a casual read, my personal recommendation would be to go for this book alone. This is the best book there is on this subject. It is one of my personal favorites, and I read this book time and time again before making this video. So those of you want to know even more about what I have talked about, or about what Hitler thought of us as a people and as a nation, go for this book, buy it online, get reading, find out more, and have fun reading it. Gain more knowledge, and get the truth about Hitler's views on us, and maybe you will think twice about idolizing Hitler, or keeping any book of his at your home or office. So thank you all for watching this video. Those of you watch this video, please subscribe to my channel at Siddharth History Dad, at Siddharth History dash Z8H. Please watch this video, like, comment on this, like this, and also recommend this to anyone else you know. Then please then I'll say this again, please also subscribe to my new history channel at Siddharth History dash Z8H. I thank you all for watching this video. Thank you for your time, everyone. Thank you.